Hello, everyone. My name is John Mohm. I'm a water planner with the Interstate Stream Commission of New Mexico. We're going to let people jump on for a bit, and we'll get this presentation started then. Hello, everyone. My name is John Mohm. I'm a water planner with the Interstate Stream Commission of New Mexico. Today's presentation, it will be an in-depth presentation on the resilience assessment, which will be evaluating resilience of public water systems to the climate change. Our presenter today is Amy Lewis. She's a hydrologist and water planner. She's been helping the state and cities and tribes and pueblos for years and helping us out with especially this large project, the 50-year water plan. So I'm gonna kick it off to Amy Lewis so she can give you an in-depth view of what we're talking about when we are talking about evaluating resilience of the public water systems.
Thank you so much, John. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. And as John mentioned, the Interstate Stream Commission is in the process of developing a 50-year water plan that examines what the future will look like as a result of climate change, and assess how prepared we are for this possible future. We are facing these challenges together, and the more we understand them, the more prepared we can be. Going to the next slide. So I'm sorry for those of you who have already seen these slides a few times. The governor has wants the 50-year water plan to have 3 elements: stewardship, sustainability, and equity. And for stewardship, we have engaged scientists to collaborate, and we've collaborated with other agencies. And for sustainability, we've looked at the aspects that increase our resilience to climate change and support the future well-being of the state. And for equity, we are working to develop a water plan that serves all New Mexicans and help prioritize funding for those struggling to provide clean water. The communities that will be most impacted by climate change are those that are unable to address the changes, and those are the ones that should be prioritized. And again, you guys have probably seen this slide. As part of the 50-year water plan goal, to be good stewards, the ISD convened a panel of climate experts to summarize what we can expect over the next 50 years. And that draft report is out for review, and you can go to ISC's water planning homepage under the 50-year water plan and review that report and provide comments. The take-home messages of this report are that we will have less runoff and recharge due to increased aridity on the order of 25%, and decreased snowpack and earlier runoff and degraded water quality. These changes will produce shocks to many aspects of our water resources. And just as an overview, climate change affects so many things. So much depends on water. Not only the water use sectors that are tracked by the OSC, the state engineer, but also our watersheds and habitat and recreational and quality life aspects. So we're really, in this talk, looking at the public water systems in detail. So what can we do to prepare for climate change? We can increase our resilience. And it's really not that different. Even without climate change, we've had droughts and we've struggled. New Mexicans have struggled with making sure we have enough water during droughts. But it's just going to get harder. And so resilience is the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions and withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruptions. So why are we examining resilience? So we want to identify the most vulnerable water systems. We want to help water system operators consider how prepared they are for climate change. And then, our next step is to identify actions that can improve resilience. So it helps to figure out how resilient we are. Then we can figure out how can we improve that. So we really want your feedback. That's why we're having this talk today. We want your feedback on the best process for developing this assessment. And we want your feedback on how we examine it. And there'll be a couple of polling questions at the end of the talk. Maybe you can give your feedback on some of these things. So how we examine resilience? Well, first we identify the projected climate change shocks that might impact public water systems. Higher temperatures, that's going to increase water demand. Less surface runoff, that's going to impact the systems with surface water supply. More fires, there could be debris flows that impact surface water systems. So we are going to determine all those factors and then figure out how do we measure the ability of a water system to respond. And we're really working on how do we evaluate equity and what data are available for this assessment and how do we rank them? Which ones are most important? So there'll be a couple questions at the end and then we'll have a discussion and you can enter your comments and there's a survey also that you can fill out where you can respond to the table that's in the matrix that's in this report. And it's just one example. So it's one idea. And in summary, the public water systems use about 9%. They diverted 9% of the water that was diverted in 2015. So there are 604 active public water systems. These water systems are tracked by OSC for the water use and categories report. So we have their location as a dot on this map, but there's also the service areas are shown. So it doesn't look like there's 604 service areas, but that's because some of them are so tiny, they show up underneath the little dot. It's just a huge range of public water systems from 15 service connections to several 100,000. So, and these are pretty much the same definition that the Drinking Water Bureau uses for community water systems. There's a little bit of variation. And okay, that was the basis for this analysis that we've done. And when we thought about the different aspects of climate change, the climate change shocks that are coming, what improves the resilience? We came up with these 5 categories. So if you think of others, please let us know. We've got water supply diversity, mix of surface water and groundwater, whether there's sufficient water available in the stream flow or aquifers. How is the infrastructure capacity? What's the watershed health? And then the ability to manage the demand. So if we map the diversity of water of these 604 systems, and this map is showing in light blue those that use very little surface water. It's almost all groundwater. in the darker blue in the middle, those are the most resilient, and they have a mix of surface water and groundwater. And then those that are almost 100% surface water are shown in the magenta color, like up by the San Juan River in the northeast corner by Farmington. And another piece we can look at is the water availability. So we looked at the minimum flow ever recorded in each of these USGS stream gauges. Some of them have a record for over 100 years, and we use records at least at 10 years long. And then so this is a map showing where those gauges are, and then it's kind of illustrating the minimum flow graded by CFS from 0 up to 700 CFS, sorry, up by Farmington, San Juan. And so we calculated the ratio of that minimum flow ever recorded in a single year to the demand of surface water. And where it's all groundwater, it's given a score of 0. And I'll explain that when I talk about the criteria table, the matrix. And then those that were like in the San Juan River, it's ample flow, it's our biggest stream. And the ratio of the minimum flow is 50 times what the demand is. So this was one way of looking at the availability of surface water. If you have other ideas, we'd be interested to hear. And for groundwater, ideally, it would be great to have a map of the saturated thickness of the aquifer statewide. There are some reports of different aquifers in different places, but it's not something that's uniformly available for us to rank all systems from apples to apples. So instead, we looked at the areas that are in compact basins and where there's a stream. Obviously, there's going to be a stream in a compact basin where the groundwater is managed to keep, or the basin is managed to keep the river whole. So any pumping impact on the river has to be offset. So there's some limitations on how much pumping occurs in those basins. And we also looked at the water level declines. That this map was a version of this map was in the state water plan, where we outlined the OSC mined groundwater basins, and those are in yellow. So we categorized instead, is it stream connected? Some are in part, like Silver City has water in the mine basin, the Mimbres Basin, and in the Gila River Basin. So it's in between. And then those that are in a stream connected basin. So that's what this map is showing us. Then we looked at infrastructure storage. And this is the capacity of a water system that, to hold treated storage defined in days. So we took their storage capacity and divided it by the daily demand to calculate how many days of supply it could be met. So large systems like Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Las Cruces, they're not going to be able to store water for multiple days. The smaller systems can do that. But the next piece, went too fast. The number of wells, this is kind of offsets the previous criteria. If a large system has a number of wells, like Albuquerque has 114 wells, they don't need the storage capacity. They're not completely dependent on that one well or even their surface water diversion. They've got lots of backup supply to balance that. So nevertheless, we ranked each of them, and then we can come up with a total score that's based on, what would be reflective of a resilient system. And then we also looked at the capacity to store raw water. And that is important because climate change is telling us that runoff may occur earlier. So if a water system that diverts surface water has been expecting that stream to be flowing all summer long, but instead the snow melts much faster and it comes off even earlier, and they don't have the capacity to store their supply, they're limited. They're less resilient than those that do have some storage capacity. And now we're going to talk a bit about the equity. So, and this has to do with infrastructure. So how do we capture the capacity to improve infrastructure? I'm going to show you two possible ways. One is based on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, where I guess EPA apparently years ago looked at what percentage of a person's income would be painful to pay, like in a fine. And this got transferred into how they determine whether they give funding for wastewater treatment plants. And so if I calculate the per capita income of the folks within the census tracts within the service area and divide it by, or divide the average of their water rate by the per capita income, then we can get a percentage at that. This is just a concept, and I used an average rate of about $45 a month for 6,000 gallons that was done by the Drinking Water Bureau's rate survey that they did in 2020. Another way to look at this is based on the New Mexico Finance Authority Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund. And they look at disadvantaged entities as those who have a medium household income that is between 80 and 100% of the state's average, or if it's less than 80%, then they're severely disabled. So these maps don't look all that different. There's some difference, but we could have a discussion about that. What's the best way to capture equity and the capacity to improve infrastructure? And we got into this discussion a little bit yesterday about water, when we talk about water quality, and I made a comment that most water, or like Albuquerque, can handle any of the changes coming with climate change that might occur from warmer temperatures, like an algal bloom. Not a problem. That maybe some smaller systems don't have that capacity. Maybe it'll be too much of a hardship. So this is a really important aspect to capture. Another piece, and I have two examples here. This is the watershed health really impacts surface water systems. It could also potentially impact groundwater systems. I don't know how many wells are in the floodplain, but with the greater stress on vegetation is going to harm soils and cause more surface erosion. And so communities are vulnerable. And here, this is from the State Forest Action Plan. If you haven't had a chance to look at that plan, they've got some fantastic maps and information that shows the whole state, like this one. This is the erosivity risk index. It's based on the K factor. If we take this and look at it by HUC 12 watershed, and then look at the area upstream of that water, of each of these watersheds, upstream of the surface water intake. Sorry, let me start over. If we look at all the HUC 12 watersheds above a surface water intake structure and calculate their erosion risk, we can see which ones are most vulnerable to erosion. And this is without a fire. So those in the mountains are more vulnerable even without a fire. If there's also the post-fire debris flow risk, and we can add that in as another parameter or instead of, that would be something to talk about. So And then the Drinking Water Bureau in August did an extensive survey of public water systems and asked them about their preparedness for drought. 304 of them, that out of the, I think, 407 that they were able to make contact with, said that they had an emergency supply of water. 101 systems had no supply or said they would buy bottled water, and 199 did not answer the survey. So that's, I think, important for being resilient. If you run out of water, what are you going to do? And so that ends the piece on supply. Now I'm going to talk about demand management. So the two pieces that we've got included here now are going to be about enforceable conservation plans and the demand response of systems. So again, the Drinking Water Bureau survey asked whether they had a conservation plan, and there are more details about the conservation plan in that survey, but this just shows those that are enforceable. So let's see, 140 said they had a plan and 197 did not. And then with demand management, so outdoor watering is a big piece. And with higher temperatures and a longer growing season, communities that have a really high per capita now, like over 200 or even over 150, they're probably doing quite a bit of outdoor watering. And if with warmer temperatures and longer growing season, that water use is going to go up significantly. And so those with a high per capita demand are less resilient than those with a lower per capita demand. The flip side of this is about demand hardening. So those that have already reduced per capita demand and allowed for growth based on that reduced per capita demand are in some ways less resilient. But that was not captured in this. Would be an interesting aspect if we had the data at hand for all the systems. So if we put it all in a chart, this is a matrix with 11 different criteria, and we weight them differently. I've shaded in brown those that are just pertaining to groundwater, and then the blue are those that just pertain to surface water, and trying to have a matrix that doesn't favor just groundwater or surface water. And we could talk about that more. And I don't know how long to leave this up for you to look at. This is in the survey that is available online, and I can go back to this when we are done with the presentation. I was going to show you the scores now. And let me show you. I also have a list of criteria that would be great to include, but we don't have the data, like senior water rights, junior water rights. I mean, the data exists, but it's not readily available. The aquifer thickness, how much loss of supply due to increased erosion, like if the reservoirs fill up. You could also say something about evaporation. And then the water demand, what's the capacity of the infrastructure to meet increased demand? And do they have additional water rights to meet increased demand? And then are there sharing agreements? Like if they get in a pinch, do they have an agreement to share water with others? That's partly involved in the emergency supply of water, but it's good to have this all worked out. So Dr. Aaron Wolf from OSU, Oregon State University, has written a book about how communities or states that have sharing agreements tend to get along much better and have less fighting. So it's not that how much water is there, it's whether they know how to get along when there's a shortage. So we don't have great data on which public water systems have such agreements. So hopefully I won't lose my voice here. So if we go and score these, I can flip through these maps. I don't know how useful they are for our discussion. We can score water diversity. We can score the minimum flow, one meaning, or red being the least resilient, blue being the most resilient for this aspect. And then stream connected scores, whether it's in a mined closed basin or stream connected, their capacity to hold treated water in storage, the number of wells they have available, the ability to capture spring runoff, the capacity to improve infrastructure, the surface water erosion risk score, the emergency supply of water score, and the conservation plan score, whether they have an enforceable plan or not. And then the per capita demand score. So John, that is the end of my presentation, and maybe we could do the poll question now.
Sure. Yeah, let me put the first one up. The question is, how well do you think this matrix captures necessary considerations related to the resilience of public water systems? All right. So 24% said it very well does that. 76% say somewhat well, and 10% says not well. For those that don't think it not well doesn't measure resilience, could you explain? In the discussion, you can unmute yourselves. Let me actually. Feel free to unmute yourselves and jump into the discussion. Actually, Gloria, you might have to hit the unmute all. Gloria, did you hit that unmute all so people can unmute themselves?
John?
Yes.
This is John Brown. I think that we're playing mute games here. I had a question. I answered both somewhat well and not well, because it said I could choose all that apply. And so I'm somewhere between not well at all and somewhat well. And I guess my question relates to whether an individual water system can be resilient in isolation from other water uses, other water sectors using water around it. It's a matter of relationship between systems and or between relationship between sectors, or relationship between one water system and another, I guess. They're not isolated from each other. The Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District is not isolated from the city of Albuquerque or the ABC WUA. Their interaction well, the resilience of either of those systems depends in part on the other. And I guess that's I don't think that gets captured in the matrix. And I'm not sure it could be captured in the matrix.
John,
Excuse me?
how would you suggest on capturing that relationship that has been mentioned before?
I don't know. Maybe others would have some idea about that, but I'm just thinking that one needs to think maybe geographically or on a watershed basis, or in some way the relationship of one kind of water use sector to another, or even two water use sectors or water use systems in a single sector. But it seems to me if we're going to capture regional differences, we ought to be looking at what kinds of agreements are made between, or can be made between, one drinking water system and another, or between one drinking water system and another use of the shared supply of water. So I'm wondering if one shouldn't try to capture what water systems draw upon the same supply, and work on whether they can achieve shortage sharing agreements or other agreements about sharing use. Would suggest that maybe doing this work totally at the statewide level is inadequate for getting at what the real issues might be among various users, and the fact that they're likely to be mutually incompatible or mutually conflicting demands on water on a particular supply. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, John. Thank you. I think that what you're talking about is kind of with the groundwater supply availability. If we had a better understanding of the demands on each aquifer, the total demands on aquifer and how long they're last, if we can model it and predict into the future and see where we're going to come up short. I mean, maybe we can pull something from the regional water planning work that was done a few years ago, where we could look at out of the 16 regions, maybe that would help capture that connectivity you're talking about. And I do feel like having a drought emergency or a supply plan, a lot of these public water systems, like in Las Cruces, there'll be a mobile home park or a small community, they're on their own water system, but they have a connection to the city of Las Cruces. So if they run out of water, they've got an emergency supply. So there are quite a few that do have agreements. The thing is, we don't have that data readily available to us, except from this recent Drinking Water Bureau survey. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it may be. I think it may be broader than a sectoral question, and of course, you're dealing with a particular sector right now, and so I think it may be a shared, the idea of how we put together governance arrangements when people have to share a single supply of water. And that it's sort of out of your wheelhouse here, since you're dealing with a single sector and its resilience kind of or a single systems and the resilience in isolation from each other.
And so some of them are actually quite different. Like the city of Santa Fe has 4 different water sources. They've got the Santa Fe River, they've got the San Juan Chama, they've got a well field out on the Caja del Rio, and then they've got a well field in town. They're pretty isolated systems. It's not exactly like Albuquerque where it's one big bathtub. So there are systems that have really worked well, and Albuquerque's worked really hard to create a conjunctive use scenario and rest the aquifer, let the water levels recover so that they're available during times of drought. And when I mentioned about modeling and projecting future depletions, I meant all water uses, every use, not just for this sector. But we don't have that data to us. Do we wait till we have models, can perfectly understand, or is this useful on some level to help people think about whether they're ready? And if we have maps that show that it looks pretty bleak for the state in a big part of the area, we need to be prepared for that. And how long do we wait to look at that problem?
Right. I'm not trying to be critical of what you're doing. I mean, what you're doing, I think, has importance on its own. I guess I'm bringing up what maybe others think it's an extraneous point that I'd like to hear that if that's true. If we don't deal with it here, somewhere in this process, we might want to deal with issues of governance and arrangements among elements of a broader sort of social, economic, ecological system, and how we put things together in a more holistic way. But I'm not expecting you to address that issue. I'm just pointing out that I think it exists.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to say something, John Hawley again. You're listening, when you hear John Brown, you're hearing from a person who's had his head around this issue probably starting in 1995, maybe before, because I know he and we were on the same panel trying to figure this out back in the middle 90s. And I rated the matrix myself as good, better than average, just because I'm thinking on a different scale, on a statewide basis. Prior to 2023, when we really get into these things, this is just an incredibly impressive place to start. And Amy needs to be congratulated for putting her pretty head into the noose on this one.
Thank you, John. And
Thanks, John.
I want it to be the best it can be, or we want it to be the best it can be. And I don't mean, sorry if I sounded defensive. I'm just frustrated with, I do wish we had a groundwater model for the whole state and we could answer these questions in a technical hydrological way rather than the crude way that it's presented here.
Yeah, and I think what John Brown was kind of hitting on, I mean, we have things separated by sector mainly. Of the goal was not to put the tools all in one, and then as people are assessing a system that they certain things are overlooked, like watershed health and habitat and things like that. We didn't want, that's why we're trying to separate that the pieces of that part, mainly so if we have experts that run utilities and things like that, they can give us kind of a general idea of where we're vulnerable to the changes coming. And then we would be grouping and summarizing these assessments at a climatic, region level. And then hopefully when we start talking about adaptation strategies, that we can show where are we vulnerable based on all these assessments by sector. How is that affecting each, as a system? How is that affecting each other? And start talking about the strategy piece of, how do you fix that? And so I don't think the actual matrices and stuff are supposed to be where this is the strategy part. It's supposed to get you thinking about those things though, and that's the main goal. So Aaron, your hand is raised. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to respond to the previous concept there of needing to be able to manage both, two different types of demands. And this is kind of my cynical view on things, but I really do believe that most of these problems are, for better or worse, going to be solved by resources. And what I mean by that is, the old adage that water will run uphill towards money. And I really think there's some value in planning on that. And that addresses the problem with different demands on it. And when you use the example of
Aaron?
am I back on?
Yeah, you're back on now.
Okay, I don't know what happened there. It just all of a sudden said, you're muted. Shut up, dummy. But my basic view on it is that the value in what we're attempting to do right now should be that everybody is looking at how to prepare for that, and call it whatever you will. If boy, I can speak today. If a municipality needs to make plans to move some water from ag use to municipal use when these circumstances arise. Well, this should be the tool that informs those decisions, and it's going to take money.
Thanks, Aaron. That's good input on that, and I appreciate it. Aaron Chavez.
Good afternoon, John. Thank you, Amy, for doing a good job. Looking at your matrix, did you guys ever consider the 40-year planning authority if the member of the public water supply systems have that? And is that a tool that they can use to acquire additional water for future uses? Second, on your number 6 criteria, capture and store spring runoff. My region, it's not only in spring, but it's maybe a daily operation to capture or pump and store water from our stream system, since the majority of our water users use surface water. So I don't know if that would fit under that. Just gonna point that out. And Amy, my last question to you is, I did in your previous slides, there's like a storage, raw water storage and stuff like that. Is that data available to review? Because I think there might be some errors in our region.
The PDF of this presentation will be available, right, John?
Yep. It will be available on the website.
And would it be better just to comment on, say, slide 6 or whatever? You show, just for example, northwest corner, there's that big red square which would say no storage. That's North Star water users. They do have a storage facility.
Perfect, thank you. I can fix that right now, so thank you.
In addition, right below it is the city of Aztec, and they have surface water storage. And in addition to that, they have access to the Animas La Plata Project Water, which is a municipal industrial supply for the group, for the water users in San Juan County.
Wonderful, thank you. I had just looked at where their surface water intake structure was, and
so that's why I'm not questioning it. That's why I said, is there an opportunity to give you input on what's happening on the ground, I guess?
Absolutely. And that's, if you notice something like that, even on the survey piece, there's a spot where you can comment on issues like that, and we want that input.
And one piece that we've had a lot of internal discussions, and I think John's going to start another poll question in a minute, but we feel conflicted about whether to even publish these maps, because we need, each public water system should have the opportunity to review it. Would they review it? What's the best method to reach out to them, to give them an opportunity to review it? Do we instead just create some tool? We don't have time for it for this 50-year water plan, but where these maps could be available, and you could zoom in and click on your part, and then it could give you your score, and you could say, does this look right? And you could say, no, that's wrong, and this is what it should be. And you can assess yourself for your own purposes. So I think we're going to be asking you that question, whether a tool like that would be useful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Before I put that poll up, we still have some other raised hands. Jeff Pompeo.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the only, I've talked with Amy several times, and she's put a lot of hard work in this, and I definitely appreciate all the work she's done. The only kind of, I guess, thing that really I find bothersome by this ranking is the fact that the majority of the water systems in the state of New Mexico are going to fall under low resilience due to the fact that they only have one well, or 4 to 6 days of 0 to 6 days of water, because the majority of the systems are small. they only have one well, and if they're lucky, they might have two. And as far as the amount of storage, I mean, with the survey that we conducted, I would say at least 300 or more of the water systems had 5 days or less of storage. So it's kind of, I think, more dedicated or towards the larger systems that have alternative sources, plus they also have surface and groundwater or different ways like that. But I think one thing that we definitely need to, or needs to be taken into consideration is, like the gentleman that said it earlier, is resources is the main thing. And the fact that most of them can't afford to drill another well or have a second source.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you so much for your help in helping us build this ranking system.
Yeah,
So
Jeff, oh, go ahead, Amy.
if this report or map, would show that have a lot of systems in trouble, wouldn't that be good to look at? Wouldn't that be good for legislators to see that we need to set aside funding to help these systems? Or maybe when we get into our next phase of this planning process is, what do we do about this? Does it mean we need more sharing agreements? And I don't want to, I know it's a hot word or a touchy subject, but maybe we need more combined systems so that they're not all these piecemeal systems. It's unbelievable how many, there's like 40 systems or just around the city of Santa Fe. Does that make sense? There's 8 systems in Placitas that they all have their own 30 different customers. Is that the best way to build resilient systems for New Mexicans, or should we have well, that's the how do we deal with the problems we have? That's the next phase. But what should we not show the low resilience because it looks bad?
I
Yeah,
wasn't suggesting that at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Callie? Are you able to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thanks. I think I have a related just kind of comment and question. I work at the Legislative Finance Committee, and we've looked at issues around public water systems, like mainly from an infrastructure and funding perspective. And so I was just thinking about criteria number 7, and if there were sort of some additional ways we might want to think about measuring systems capacity to improve infrastructure and how that relates to resiliency. So, I was going to say the exact same thing about sort of the number of small systems and their limited technical, financial, and managerial capacity to both plan for changes and to make necessary infrastructure improvements, whether that's related to like adapting to a changing climate and a changing water supply, or also like even before you get to that point, just dealing with like old infrastructure. So, I was thinking about, I get what you're getting at with like the water rates to income ratio, but there are also systems where low water rates contributes to low resiliency because they don't have any kind of financial reserves to respond or to improve their infrastructure. So I don't know exactly what to do with that. One way to do it would maybe be including the actual size of the water system as a measure of resiliency, maybe including the age of infrastructure somehow. I don't know, something like that. It would be useful, like if there's going to be a systematic assessment of the resilience of public water systems statewide, it would certainly be really useful for the funders in the state to like have some kind of like comprehensive assessment of those kind of criteria that would help guide them in sort of prioritizing spending. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much, Kelly. Love to talk to you more at some point.
Okay, sounds good. I can send you my, if you have contact info at the end of this presentation, I'll send you my contact information.
Okay, it is at the beginning.
Yeah, the equity piece is something we've been talking about quite a bit. So, because it's hard to capture that statewide, and how do you look at that? So, Bob Wesley.
Concept that seems to be missing that I just wanted to bring up, and that is
Bob, your mic. Can you adjust it?
This is as close as I'm getting. The existence of a well is maybe, or multiple wells, is necessary but not sufficient. I think the concept of dwindling aquifers needs to show up explicitly somewhere. We have a lot of those in places across the state where we are draining our aquifers, and having 3 wells drawing on an aquifer that dries up is not real resilient. And so I think that concept needs to be injected somewhere. And the another piece, which is maybe a nitpick, is the utility's ability to live through a sustained power outage. We're seeing lots of those across the country nowadays, and we're going to see more. And you know, what happens when their water treatment facilities or their pumps stop working? Are they armed with backup generators, or those sorts of things? The ability to react to a power outage. So I think those two pieces, the dwindling rivers and aquifers and the power outage resilience, should be mapped in somewhere. That's my pitch.
Thank you, Bob. So this was our attempt to capture the dwindling aquifers. The areas, and this was given us weight of 2. So all the red dots are public water systems that are in mined basins, and they get a low score for resilience. And those in stream connected are blue. So can you think of another way to capture that?
That's the right topic, but I guess it's shown more subtly than I'd like to see, because we've got a lot of closed basin aquifers around the state. Yes, it's the right concept, but I think it's needs somehow to be highlighted better.
Okay, thank you.
I have to talk about stream connected aquifers. I'm looking specifically at the Upper Pecos, at the area of Santa Rosa and Puerto de Luna, and where I've worked quite a bit, and very good reports by John Shoemaker and others on that area. And the problem there is that water is brackish. It's even the springs at the famous springs at Santa Rosa are brackish, about 3,000 milligrams per liter. So and when you try to deepen a well there, it gets worse. So even though they're connected with the Pecos River, it's not, this is way upstream from where Aaron Malak has been mentioning, but it's those maps on the rivers need to show quality of water in those springs and river. That's my suggestion to add. It's just not, we're assuming when we see a blue dot, we think less than 1,000 milligrams per liter total dissolved solids. That's not true for many of our rivers, particularly in the Pecos Valley.
Thank you, John. Again, so we're working on the impacts of climate change. Will climate change make that water quality worse, or are they less resilient because they have poor water quality?
My answer to that is climate change is going to make it worse, always. So, but the resilience is knowing that's going to happen. That's the heart of resilience, is knowing what is around the corner, so you know that you don't take that turn.
Thank you.
I have a question that came in. It's a comment. Just let me read it. Is the OSC a part of the Climate Action Task Force, which is working towards objectives of the governor's EO 003 through subsequent climate action teams working with other state departments towards building resilience in various forms, including natural resource resilience and mitigating future climate impacts on these resources? If not, why not? We are. There are a few members from the OSC and the ISC a part of that task force. And then a lot of what has been discussed here is what these teams are working to solve collectively. Maybe very good ideas for representatives from the OSC to become involved in these processes and these teams. We are a part of it. We are working with other state agencies from that task force, currently working on these different matrices and concepts. Our goal was to reach out to them, and that's happening at the same time as this. Are there any other discussion points or questions? I was going to post another poll. Right, let me. Oh,
good afternoon. This is Paul Montoya in Farmington. And when we're talking about these small water groups, there has to be a benefit of scale. In other words, you can't run a 100-mile pipeline for 2 houses. You need to have the benefit of scale. And in order to get those 2 houses or 4 houses to work together, they need to realize that there's a problem there and that the only way this can be solved is by working together. In that light, I think the state is a good person to kind of provide the leadership, not necessarily use a hammer, so to speak, but provide the leadership and let the locals solve their problems and not get in there and try to solve it for them. I just think that's a better way to go handle it. And then that makes them have skin in the game and they're more interested in what happens. That's my thought. Thank you for listening.
thank you. All right, let me put this poll up. What is your opinion about the state assessing public water systems based on the available data as shown in the matrix?
So this question is asking, do you want the state to produce these maps and do this assessment? Do you think it's of value?
Okay. We have 73% approve. We have 27% that are not sure and 0% that disapprove. So it's very interesting and good to know on that piece that a lot of you are kind of looking at what the assessment piece is and you know, about us looking into that. And then we have a final poll. Would you want to have a tool that allows you to assess your public water system? Amy, could you explain this piece?
Sure. We're wondering or considering applying for funding to create a tool from Homeland Security, has hazard mitigation funds, and perhaps we could have a GIS-based tool where I kind of explained it earlier, where you could just rank yourself and see where you fall, and it could give you a suggested answer to a question or to a criteria, and you could say, man, that's not right. For me, our system's this way. And do you think that's of value?
All right, we have 80% that say yes, 13% say not sure, and 7% say no. Do anybody want to discuss on those last two polls?
Yeah, John, let me qualify my vote. I think if the state wants to do the assessment and has the resources, that would be delightful, providing they do it in coordination with the local utility. But I think there are probably better ways to deploy the state's limited resources. So it's, you know, a mixed answer.
Thanks, Bob. Anybody else?
This is John B. I think I want to support Bob's idea that there may be other ways of going about it than using state resources. The idea of self-assessment, I think, is a great idea. But again, one needs to have a governance structure in mind in operation in those places that kind of assessment is going on, so that people can make actual decisions about what that assessment means to their to the way they go about governing the system. Again, I think it was Paul who just said, as long as it's not a hammer coming down, there's a value in always in doing self-assessments.
Thanks, John. Anybody else? Aaron?
This is Aaron. I just wanted to make one comment that the concept that the limited resources maybe should move this away from the state's responsibility. I agree 100%, except that when crisis does occur, and quite often we've seen that crisis be a result of poor planning, the state is the one that ends up, that they turn to the state to help resolve the problem. So that's the flip side of that coin, is those limited resources maybe would be better spent to prevent the disaster rather than try and repair it after the fact.
Thank you, Aaron. Paul?
I've lost my train of thought after that comment, so thank you. If I come up with it, I'll get back on.
Thank you. We do have a comment that came in. EPA requires water systems over 3,300 to conduct a risk and resiliency self-assessment. Thank you. We actually, Amy, we did any of the data that we collected on that from the EPA on that?
So maybe Jeff Pompeo, who, if he's still on the line, could answer that question.
He is not on the line that I see.
Okay. I
That
am
is good,
not
yeah.
aware of that survey.
Oh, can I chime in? This is Krista Schultz with the Drinking Water Bureau.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, so EPA does require water systems to do a self-assessment on their risk and resiliency of their water system. This data is for the water systems to have themselves. They do certify that they completed it to EPA, but they don't actually send the assessment to EPA. But in theory, most water systems over 3,300 should have something like that in place or be finishing it up right now.
Is that 3,300 customers?
3,300 in population. I'm sorry, I should have put that in.
Thank you. Paul?
Oh, I clicked on when I should have clicked off.
Oh. Are there any other comments or questions on the entire presentation, not just the polls now? Amy,
Just
do you
one more.
Oh, go ahead.
Just one more. I think it's a great thing if the OSE, ISC develop tools that people can use for self-assessment, or use those kinds of tools that may be provided through EPA or some other way. But one of the points that I've tried to make in the past relates to the ISC as being in an important place for providing technical assistance to people. I think this is what Aaron was getting at a little earlier. If the ISC has a role as a policeman on one hand, they also have a role as a technical assistance source, and it would be instructive, I think, if the 50-year water plan actually ended up providing a set of tools for local and regional conglomerations of people to use to do self-assessment for purposes of resilience and improving their governing capacity.
Thank you, John.
My comment is that I think that we need people need input from federal and state and local agencies that are what I call public service agencies. They're not regulatory. They examples would be in the federal government would be the Natural Resource Conservation Service, used to be called the Soil Conservation Service, the U.S. Geological Survey. These and within our state, an agency that's already playing a key role in this is the Bureau of Geology and Natural Resources at New Mexico Tech. These are agencies that are dedicated to public service. They're unlike other federal agencies and the state engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission that also have some police powers. And so, and the neat thing about certainly the Natural Resource Conservation Service is that it's bottom up. There are soil water conservation districts that are based at a county level off usually. And so those are the people that should be really well funded to give just people trust the information they get from these agencies generally. And then the other thing I want to mention is that how resilient, if we talk about the San Juan River and the Rio Grande, they are both tapping now into water across the Continental Divide in various ways. And so how resilient from the Colorado River experts and the Rio Grande experts, how resilient, say, is Albuquerque or Farmington or the Navajo Irrigation Project, those entities, how resilient to them if there's a really major call on the Colorado River and Albuquerque suddenly sees Heron Reservoir bone dry. There's no water coming tapped off the upper San Juan. So we're robbing Peter to pay Paul in some of these instances. And so these are kind of, how resilient are we to those kind of things? I'm just curious. I have no clue, except they're climate driven.
So Albuquerque and Santa Fe, thanks for your comment, John. They've got themselves in a much better position than 20 years ago when I was at the city of Santa Fe and we had no extra supply. We were out of water and people are not allowed to water outside. Now they have, with the San Juan Chama direct diversion that both Santa Fe and Albuquerque have, they have been able to turn off their well fields and the water levels have recovered remarkably. And if we can have cycles of drought that aren't too long, they can go back to using the wells, but then use the renewable supply when it's available.
I guess I can comment again. This is Paul, and I finally have collected my thoughts. One of the things I was curious about in your chart here on resilient parameters, have you considered any educational opportunities or requirements or anything like that in developing the resilience of the plan? I'll ask that question, then I have another one.
Would that be an adaptation strategy, like to do education, or are you wanting the water system operators to be educated or monitoring their water levels or?
Yeah,
aware?
that and educating the community as well. You know, I mean, we can have well-educated operators, but if the communities aren't on board with it, it makes it difficult to maintain the water supply that you actually need. So I was just wondering if there should be something on this chart that says addresses something about educational opportunities as they may arise.
One sort of indirect way of capturing that is with under the water demand, both of the water or the conservation plans and the pattern of landscape watering. Those communities that have reduced their per capita demand significantly that we've witnessed over the last few decades, they're tuned into the problem, and they've got drip irrigation, and they've taken their turf out, and they're educated. And also those communities that have conservation plans are likewise aware, you know, if they've got a tiered rate structure, they know if they use more than 6,000 gallons a month, the rate's going to go up. And if they use more than 12,000 or whatever, each system's different, but it's raised the consciousness of those folks. And the conservation plans are so loaded, and that's a whole separate hour-long talk to talk about the different ways to have
Yeah, and what I'm talking about here too is there are certain communities, or I don't know how pronounced they are now, but it used to be that there was no penalty for using as much water as you want. And those are probably more in line with aquifers than they are with stream flow stuff. But, and that as the aquifers have started to deplete a lot, I don't think you're going to find many of those systems around anymore.
Thank you, Paul. We do have a question that came in. Are population projected changes being considered for the water demand resiliency? And that the answer to that is that's more something that we address in the kind of the supply and demand gaps in the state water plans. The main focus of the 50-year water plan on this resiliency is to focus on the physical science, the physical climate changes to the environment that are affecting the demand, on at least of how we're looking at this. We were trying to keep out the population piece of that in as we were looking at this more on the what is the physical climate changes that are going to affect your demand on that piece.
I have another comment too, and that is the watershed-based plans that are submitted to the Surface Water Quality Bureau do have a set of directions that you're supposed to follow in developing these water plans.
Which plans are those? The conservation ones?
My copy here is the Animas Watershed Plan, which is, I think the Environmental Department refers to those as watershed-based plans. And they're really pushing for every basin to get a watershed development plan put together. So there's probably a wealth of information there that may be of value to any plan that we put together.
Thank you. And that's NMED that requires that?
Well, yeah, it's based upon environmental EPA requirements for watershed-based plans, but the environmental department does have a set of criteria. I think there's like 7 or 9 components. I can't find it in my book right now, but steps that you have to consider when you put together these watershed-based plans. And it's probably a little bit more tilted towards water quality than it is actual environmental stuff, not environment, climate change stuff. But it's a pretty short step from going from watershed problems to climate change problems.
Thanks, Paul. No, that's some great information. Really appreciate that.
Oh, and I want to thank you guys for putting this on. It's pretty good information.
Absolutely, absolutely. Are there anybody else? Bob, your mic's on. Do you have something to say?
Yes, I'm not muted. Yeah, I'm was looking at line item number 11 on this chart that's up, and in probably more detail than I should have looked at it. But there's another concept that walks backwards from what it seems to be saying. And let me, for the moment, call it a line item 12 that would be low-hanging fruit phenomenon. And when the utility has a high gallon per capita per day, they are resilient in that they can cut back. Whereas if the utility has a low gallon per capita per day, to some extent, their customers are down to the bone and can't go back. And that would show, as you go across the chart, a reverse trend from what number 11 does. Number 11 thinks if I'm low gallon per capita, I'm resilient. But if I'm low gallon per capita, I'm down to the bone. And so I'm wrestling with it. I'm not sure how to fix it, but I wanted to raise the concept that
100% agree with you, Bob. Right.
There's a low-hanging fruit concept that may be a separate line 12.
Well, early on, we wrestled with having a criteria where, they have a conservation plan and a high per capita or low per capita. What we wanted to try to capture was communities that are allowing growth based on water savings through conservation are reducing their resilience, and each time they add new customers. But that's one of those pieces that we let go of because we don't have the data. I know what Santa Fe is doing. I don't know what the 603 other public water systems are doing, whether they have that. So remember, part of this is what's in this table is what we had data for. So we could make another table that isn't database, but it's just concepts, and we can include something like that.
I guess I'm concerned about that attitude. And I don't mean it really pejoratively, but the fact that we don't have data doesn't mean we should ignore it. I think we need the meaningful line items, and if we don't have data, recognize that we don't have data, but that it's an item we're not dealing with. I think if we, the absence of data, meaning don't worry about it, gets us in terrible trouble.
Thank you.
But if we have maybe 30 seconds, as never mind, that's a story.
Bob, you want to?
Yeah, let me tell you the story. It's about a drunk who lost a quarter and was looking and looking and looking, a lot of people helping him. And finally one of them says, well, where was it that you dropped a quarter. Oh, I was over on 23rd Street. And so what now are you looking for it here? Are the lights better? I think the issue is that if we don't, if it's difficult to measure, it still needs to be addressed.
We all agree with you. And when writing up this report, we'll have a list of those items that are important, but we don't have the data for it.
That's fair.
Okay. And I guess our question, my big question is it worth even doing this assessment when some of the data is flawed, when you haven't had the time to vet it with each of the 604 systems for them to review every criteria and whether it's done precisely right? Is this too dangerous to do with just this set of data that we have? Is it of value?
I have a question, and that is on the table that you've developed, have you used all 10 water systems to assemble this data or this chart?
Yes.
So they all gave you a comment on this?
No, I have not reached out. We have not reached out to the public. That would
No,
take.
not the public, the water systems.
Yeah, we have met with some, with the head of the rural water users, with some of the major cities like Albuquerque, Santa Fe City and County to get their reaction to this and their input. But I think it would be really important for each public water system to review their score.
So what you're saying is, if I'm understanding this right, this table does not really represent all 600 water systems because you have not talked to all 600 water systems. Is that what I'm given to understand?
I have data for all of them.
From all of them?
I have data on the water diversity. So the state engineer captures, we have information on how much water they divert each year from surface water and groundwater. We can calculate that ourselves. We can calculate the minimum ratio. We were able to assess them ourselves, but it may be that there's an error in the data sets that I use or we use, and it would be.
Can you go back to the table for a moment, please? Okay. I see what you're talking about now.
Going back to Bob Wesley, I think that it's awesome. Bob, like John Brown, has been around getting his head around this and volunteering his life and property for water issues. And I think he can correct me, but I'm thinking that we need a third. We've got water supply and water demand, and then water, I don't know what to call it, but black swan, possible but extremely unlikely events, something that a wish list or what we would like to know but don't. And and that's on this one. Factors, data not consistently available, but is important. And so that one needs to go front and center too. And every once in a while you flesh that one up. But I think we all need to look at it. That's all I have.
Thank you, John. I did get a question in. There appears to be a consistent typo across criteria 1. Surface water repeats twice in each score. Isn't it supposed to be a mix of groundwater and surface water?
Yeah, we received the same question yesterday. There's not a typo. Instead of showing the percent groundwater, it was too complicated. So you get a low score of 1 if you're mostly surface water and mostly groundwater. So if you're 0 to 10% surface water, that means you're 90 to 100% groundwater. But it was too complicated in the space I had to add in the percent groundwater. 90 to 100% surface water means 0 to 10% groundwater, but I also went the other end where it's very little surface water and almost all groundwater. So we're scoring low if you have only one source, and if higher resilience if you have a mix. So if it's between 40 and 60% surface water, that means you have between 40 and 60% groundwater. Hope that explains it.
Thank you, Amy.
So I have a question for John Holly, like in our wish list, and I will definitely add back in that piece about the water hardening. Bob Wesley, thank you for bringing that up. How would we score water quality? Would we say salinity is greater than 1,000 parts per million? It's a low resilience. Less than 200 ppm, it's high resilience, or something like that for all sources of supply? Did you hear my question, John Holly?
Yes, I did. I wish Ed Archuleta of El Paso Water Utility was here. He would say, if you have a aquifer like in the Mesilla Basin or in the Hueco Bosa and even in the New Mexico or Texas part, and you've got water of 3,000 parts per million TDS, and you have an aquifer that you can produce 1,000 gallon a minute from a well-designed well, that's a resource. And so many of us right now, we're still in a mindset of just thinking about surface water and groundwater. That is what people call potable. But for public water supplies, not for irrigation, not for ag, but for public water supplies, where water does flow uphill to money, you can easily even tap a if you have the right 2021 RO treatment system, you can produce like they're doing at the F. Bailey Hutchison plant that services about probably 500,000 customers in the El Paso area. You can produce 25 million gallons a day of drinking water. And then also those really good aquifers are awesome for managed aquifer recharge if the water you're putting in is chemically compatible with the water that's in the ground. And Albuquerque is way out ahead of the game, and Rio Rancho are already in the game of managing water, but Albuquerque Basin, unlike the Mesilla Basin, still has a robust supply of water coming down the river as that far. But once it gets down to Elephant Butte, then it's a system of we're putting water out to dry all too often. But resilient quality is, it depends on the money you have you want to, how can you convince your public voters to support public works projects that develop these alternative supplies? But you got to remember, as I mentioned yesterday, that for all the water we're taking out of our aquifers now is going to be recharged by something that's less lower quality. And so that's the reality that we have to face.
Thanks, John.
May I come in?
Yep.
John?
Yep.
I just realized when this slide came up and stayed up, what had deceived me that I had missed. And I guess what I've got is a slidemanship comment. This table should look like it's part of the previous table. So for example, it should have the same color bar. The numbers should be like 12 to 18. So it doesn't look like it's a totally separate, irrelevant thing. I just realized I had gotten faked out by looking only at the previous table.
Thanks, Bob. So I did get a question. Is comparing public water systems and domestic use, groundwater, surface water, might be too broad? Drinking water users will all be in the non-resilient zone, but certainly some are more resilient than other areas. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah, so hey, John, I was just trying to say, and that kind of harkened back to, I think, some comments before. The more I look at this, the more I do agree that it's almost difficult to, Amy's comments always go to Santa Fe, to Albuquerque, to, Las Cruces, to other, larger systems that can be compared together and looked at, and yet there's lots and lots of water users who have small wells or maybe even use surface water, but they're large areas that probably do have low resilience, but some may be less resilient than other areas, even though they're all domestic well users. And maybe that's too detailed for this plan, but maybe is there a way to kind of segment those out, so we see kind of where in the state you have these people who are relying on a well that, but large areas could go dry, altogether. And yeah, I think you might have some information there, but I'm just curious if maybe that could get looked at somewhat separately.
This map shows the areas that are served by public water systems. So I do have a map showing all the domestic wells, but it just doesn't work at this scale. But if you zoom in again around Albuquerque, say, then you click on, there's gaps of where that water service area is, and it gets filled in with a mass of wells, that the domestic wells, like around Corrales or in the Northeast Heights, or and of course all the rural areas are going to have domestic wells, and lots of domestic wells all over the state, over 100. So This piece is just about evaluating public water systems, this presentation today.
Okay, but the table is public water systems and domestic wells, right? Wasn't that the?
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
these are criteria that could be used. For this
Yeah,
title,
so-
I changed the title to be just for public water systems. So
Yeah, so I do think that's the different, you know, there's definitely, there's so many domestic wells that almost looking at those separately versus public water systems does seem like it would be worthwhile to do. But, and it might include elevation, watershed, health, you know, more of those sorts of things than a public water system might rely on.
That's the point that I was going to bring up is put those wells on that watershed elevation, even in the 5 different physiographic parts of the state. Obviously, if you're up in Catherine County, there's a whole bunch of wells that are all in forested areas where the precipitation is 15, 20 inches per year. And so you got to put them into that kind of context.
And geology does play a big role in those shallower wells as well. So, I mean, it's hard to do, you know, and I think looking at the public water systems is a good idea, but, and that might help consider how some areas that have a lot of domestic wells could be converted to public water systems. But I think that's where those discussions can go to for resiliency at some point.
thank you.
Okay.
I did get a comment that came in. Bob's comment helps by combining the 2 tables. It does help remember the larger issues, differences statewide, at least in principle. Thanks for that input. Is there anything else, any questions, comments, or discussion pieces? If not, Amy, do you have any final, any final pieces to say?
Just thank you so much for your thinking. And I know it's a lot to absorb. And if you think about it more and want to get in contact with me, please do. I'd welcome your input. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and the main goal of this part of this assessment piece is to get this input and discussion going of how do we improve this, these matrices, these assessment pieces to how can we do that? And if you have suggestions, that's what we're looking for, or questions. So again, the survey on how to improve these is on our website. Jump on there. Again, this presentation will also, the recording will be on there, and the PDF of the presentation will be available on our website. If there's no other discussion or questions, I was going to ask, Hannah, are you there? Are there anything you want to cover?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I've been listening into this really interesting discussion, and I just want to thank everybody for your participation, and all of this input is important in our process, and we'll be taking it into consideration in our next steps, and we'll continue to keep you all posted.
Thanks. And again, go to our website. Our next meeting is on Tuesday next week, and it will be on watersheds and habitat on the sector. And so feel free to attend that. We'll have information that day to go over and lots of discussion, I'm sure. So again, please jump on, participate in the survey, give us, we'll have this same discussion at the upcoming presentations, but thanks for everybody for attending and helping us with your input. And I will see everybody on Tuesday.
Thank you.